Today we're talking all things escrow with my good friend and colleague for over 10 years, Natasha Keitges from Foundation Escrow. My name's Greg Cummings from the Greg Cummings Group and Compass Real Estate. Natasha, welcome. Thank you for joining me today. We're going to talk all things escrow. So first and foremost, what does escrow even mean? I get that question all the time.
I get it a lot too. So basically what escrow is when a buyer and seller come to an agreement when someone's buying or selling their home. They use an escrow company that is a third party, so they're not related to anybody in the transaction. And then we're the ones that hold the funds. We're the ones that process the entire transaction. And at the end, we release the funds to the seller. We pay off, if there was any construction or any paint job, anything done on the property, staging, whatever the case may be, we release all the funds. It confirms with the county. That means the transaction, the deed has been transferred from the old owner to the new owner, and then the new owners can move in.
Perfect. So it's just like a neutral third party, basically.
Neutral third party, absolutely.
Maybe we can break that down even more. Like, is there a good example of
like what that looks like?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Greg, you're in a band.
Yeah, I am. Yep.
And you're a drummer.
I am.
Okay, let's say you are having a concert and I'm in the audience and I look at that drum set and I'm like, I've got to have that drum set.
Okay.
So after the concert, I come up to you. I have a $500 personal check, and I say, hey, Greg, can I buy your drum set? Here's my check for $500. You're
going to need a little bit more money than that, but...
Okay.
Yeah. I get the point.
Okay. You don't know me.
Okay.
You don't know me.
Yep.
I just want to give you $500 for your drum set.
Okay.
Would you take my $500 check?
Probably not right on the spot.
Right. Okay. So what you would do is you would go to maybe a drum set selling company.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
And you say, hey, Natasha wants to buy my drum set, but I don't know her. How do we make this transaction? So maybe I would give my $500 to the company. You would give your drum set to the company, right?
Right.
They would verify that my funds are mine. No issues there.
Okay.
They're holding it. And then I get the drum set. You get the $500.
That makes sense.
Right.
All right.
You trust them, right? They're a
Absolutely.
neutral third party. They're not related to this transaction at all.
Okay. That makes a lot of sense. I think that brings it down to a very simple level.
Very simple.
Very good example there. So say I'm a buyer and once my money goes into an escrow account, is that FDIC insured?
It is.
It is.
It is
Okay.
up to $250,000.
Okay.
So what happens is that money actually doesn't come into a Foundation Escrow bank account. It actually goes into a trust account we have set up. So it's not like it's coming in here to Foundation Escrow. It goes directly to our trust account.
Okay. All right. That makes sense. And can you just automatically give that money to the seller?
No, not right away. We have to make, once the transaction closed, we maybe have the buyer's, funds to close not just the earnest money deposit, but the entire down payment. Once the transaction is ready to close, at that point, title will release the money to us. We release it to the seller.
Got it. Now, as a buyer, let's say I put my money into this escrow account, but I don't want to move forward with the transaction. Is escrow just allowed to just give it right back to me?
Well, that's a good question. That's all something that is in the contract.
Right.
Like, are they past their contingencies? Sometimes, yes, the buyer can get their earnest money deposit back. Maybe there's something came up in the transaction where they want to back out. And if they can, and it's agreed upon, absolutely. But no, it's not just automatically given back to the buyer.
Earnest money deposit. So, a lot of people might not know what that is. Can you shed a little light on specifically what that is?
So an earnest money deposit, commonly you'll hear it be called an EMD. And essentially what that is it's a deposit that the buyer gives as in good faith, that I want to, that they ultimately want to buy this home, and it gives some security for the seller. So typically we see between 1% and 3% of the purchase price. But from an agent perspective, I mean, what do you advise your buyers to do when writing a contract?
Great question. It's often determined by the market. So, if it's a little bit more leaning towards a buyer, I might have that buyer write only 1%. If we're very competitive, we might want to go to the max, which is 3%. The 3% is basically the amount that the seller could keep if push came to shove and, the buyer canceled after their contingencies are removed. That is the amount that they can keep if it came down to, us involving liquidated damages, etc. So typically as a seller, you want all that money in that escrow account so you don't have to go run after a buyer and find the difference.
Got it. Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. So, when I'm representing a seller, those buyers are going to be putting 3% in. When I'm representing a buyer and it's not as competitive, of course, I only want my people putting in 1% or the minimum that the seller would be willing to take. That's my experience from it.
Everything is in a contract, and we go off that contract. We just can't a buyer can't call and say they want this, or a seller can't call and say they want that. Like, we have to be given instruction, and it has to be agreed upon by both the buyer and the seller, and it has to be signed.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
And leads back to the whole statement of a neutral third party.
Exactly.
So, Natasha, we often throw around in our industry the term, I'm an escrow, we're an escrow, you're an escrow. What does that really even mean?
So being in escrow essentially means like the buyer writes a contract on a home that they want to buy with the seller. There could be multiple negotiations back and forth. Once there's been agreed upon purchase price and the terms, etc., at that point, once all documents are signed and everything's agreed upon, you send that contract over to the escrow company. And then the buyer has 3 days to send in their earnest money deposit to secure, okay, this is the deal I want, I'm in.
Okay.
And then as soon as the escrow company receives that earnest money deposit, now we are in escrow. And now the process begins of documents being signed, all that kind of stuff. Anything related to the transaction, now you're in escrow.
What does it look like when you use the term that escrow is now closed?
So when escrow is complete, it's essentially when the deed has been transferred from the seller to the buyer. And what we do is we basically release that to the county, wherever the home is located.
Okay.
The county records that deed. Once it's recorded, now escrow is closed, and now the new buyer can move into the seller's home.
Everybody's happy?
Everybody's happy.
One of the big things that has recently come up is fraud. And I mean, we've got disclosures about this now.
So the fraud is basically coming through the email. So people are hacking into, everybody's email system. And a lot of the times it comes from unsecured emails, which typically can be Gmail, it can be Yahoo. And it comes sometimes from the buyers or seller. They'll tap into that. And what they'll do is they'll take all the information from the escrow company and send an email to the buyer and say, hey, wiring instructions have now changed. This is your escrow company, please now, here's the new account, please wire your money here. And oftentimes they do it in a way to make it seem so urgent. Like, hey, we're closing today, we're due, you know what I mean? So people get into kind of a panic and they want to do it right away. And that is a huge red flag.
Right.
First of all, wiring instructions for an escrow company will never, never, never change. If you open escrow and they give you your wiring instructions to send in your earnest money deposit, it's the same wiring instructions when they're sending in their closings. So always call if you get an email that says that, call the escrow company immediately. Say, hey, I just got this email. Did you send this? Absolutely not. Again, wiring instructions will never change.
In what steps are the escrow companies doing to jump ahead of this or prevent it, et cetera?
So one of the things that we do is we will not email wiring instructions because emails are where they're hacking in and getting that information, right? So we will not email wiring instructions, no matter what. If somebody is out of the country and they can't get it, we will print out our wiring instructions and put it in a FedEx and get it directly to them overnight. But we will never give it in an email. So we ask them to call our main line, look up our phone number on our website to make sure it's the correct phone number. And sometimes people get a little frustrated because they're traveling or this or that. It's a pain to call. I get it. But is it more of a pain to call or is it more of a pain to lose $100, $200, $300 plus thousands of dollars that oftentimes you can't get back? I mean, you can get the FBI involved right away, but sometimes that money's offshore, it's gone.
Natasha, as a seller going into escrow, what is one of the bigger stumbling blocks that you see happen?
I would say the most common one is getting HOA docs ordered. Those are one of the things that cannot be paid through escrow when the transaction's closing. They must be paid upfront with a credit card from the seller because the buyers have to review those before removing contingencies, right? Oftentimes there's more than one HOA. So I would highly recommend that sellers let their agent know, one, there is an HOA, but if there's 2 HOAs, I've seen 3 HOAs. And HOA companies can take up to 10 business days to send those documents for a buyer to review. So if we don't know about it and we're 2 or 3 weeks into the transaction, that can be an issue and delay closing on time.
Yeah. And
one of the things I want to add too is sometimes the HOA documents can be expensive.
Right.
You don't think that it would be, but they can be $500. I've seen them even with 3 HOAs up to $3,000. So just be prepared that there will be that upfront expense.
Savita.
Yes.
Yeah, Savita's got a very expensive
They do.
HOA document.
They do.
And those are not fun surprises
No.
for anybody involved, especially the seller.
Yes.
Now, what about a stumbling block that you've seen occur for a buyer once you're in escrow?
Probably for buyers, I would say going out of town. Oftentimes, myself included, when I bought a home, I didn't know, I wasn't planning on it, and I found a home I loved, and I ended up going out of town, right? So it happens more than you think. And what can happen is if you go out of country, even if you go out of state, we have to set up a mobile notary so the buyers can sign their loan documents. But if they're out of the country, that can be more difficult because they'll have to sign their docs with a notary at the embassy. So that can cause some delays too. So always let your escrow company know up front so we can coordinate that, have that all lined up. Where do you need to go? Who's going to be doing it? That sort of thing. So it's not a big deal to go out of town, but just communication is key in this business. So just communicate with your agent and with your escrow company that you will be out of town.
Obviously, escrow has to get paid for this service. How is that even calculated?
The escrow fee is based on the sales price of the home.
And is it a percentage or?
It's a certain dollar amount per thousand.
Okay.
Kind of calculates that way.
Okay.
Yeah. So, I mean, the lower the sales price, the lower the escrow fee is going to be.
Right. And I mean, obviously everything's negotiable in a contract, but typically who pays it?
So the buyer and the seller both have escrow fees to pay. So typically, the seller has an escrow fee and the buyer has an escrow fee. Oftentimes we'll see on a contract to be split 50-50, but what is a better way to do it is really do each to pay their own, only because buyers have to pay a little bit more for an escrow because they have to sign their loan documents. So there's an additional notary fee there. So it's best to say to each pay their own.
Hey, Natasha, thank you so much for spending the time with me to talk all things escrow. I think we got a lot of great information for anybody watching this out there. And I look forward to opening our next escrow with you guys.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it. And I look forward to working with you and your clients.
All right. Thanks again.